Good morning. There haven't been election results like this, not in my lifetime, for these have been uniquely the thank you elections. Thank you to all who've been in power during the pandemic and the successful vaccine campaign. So, thank you Boris Johnson in England, thank you Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, and thanks too in Wales to Labour and Mark Drakeford. Trouble is, it leaves nations of the UK in the hands of mutually hostile parties which today seem almost unchallengeable. The SNP, despite a few setbacks, back in power in Scotland, while the Tories, having smashed Labour in the north, are starting to look something like the National Party of England. So what does that mean for the once United Kingdom? Now, frankly, this is a huge morning in politics, and I'll be joined by the victorious First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, live in the studio, and by Michael Gove, the man charged by Boris Johnson with saving the Union, who has come up from London to join us live this morning in Glasgow. After a catastrophic couple of days for Keir Starmer, I'll be joined by the former Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, and by Labour's leader in Scotland, Anushka Asthana. But it's not all politics. I'll be talking about the next stage of opening up and vaccines with Professor Andrew Pollard, director of the Oxford Vaccine Institute. And for some optimism and, dare I say it, wisdom, I'll be talking to the historian and presenter Mary Beard, who's been thinking about what life is like as we emerge from the pandemic. Reviewing the news with me in Glasgow, BBC Scotland's political editor Glenn Campbell, and from London, the Guardian's editor-at-large, Anushka Asthana. But we begin with the news headlines and Nina Warhurst.
Andrew, thank you. The Prime Minister will speak to the SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon by phone today after her party won the Scottish parliamentary election by a huge margin, which left them just one seat short of an outright majority at Holyrood. Ms Sturgeon vowed to push ahead with her plans for a second independence referendum after the COVID crisis is over and said the Westminster government has no democratic justification to block it. Meanwhile, in England, the Conservative gained control of 12 more councils, while Labour lost 7. But it did better in the mayoral elections. 8 Labour mayors kept their jobs, including London Sadiq Khan, and the party took another 2 mayoral spots from the Conservatives. 2 of the UK's busiest rail operators are warning passengers not to travel today because of disruption caused by the discovery of cracks in some high-speed trains. The issue is affecting Great Western and London North Eastern services between London and Penzance, Bristol, Cardiff, York, Newcastle and Edinburgh. The railway minister has warned that the disruption caused by the Hitachi 800 trains is likely for a prolonged period. Detectives are continuing to question a man in his 20s over the murder of Julia James. The police community support officer was attacked while walking her dog in Kent 12 days ago. A post-mortem examination revealed the 53-year-old died from significant head injuries. There's an appeal for witnesses and information. And the Queen's cousin, Prince Michael of Kent, has been secretly filmed talking about taking large sums of money for access to Russian decision-makers. The footage was recorded by undercover reporters from the Sunday Times and Channel 4's Dispatches programme, who were posing as business people seeking access to Kremlin officials. The Prince is not a full-time working royal and receives no public funding, but does have long-standing links to Russia. That's all from me. The next news on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Back to you, Andrew.
Nina, thank you very much indeed. And now, as ever, to the papers. And there's a very, very interesting split between the London-based papers, though we have their Scottish editions here, and the fully Scottish papers, if you like. Very different tone indeed. There's the Sunday Times. Do not fight us, Sturgeon warns the Prime Minister. SNP falls 1 seat short of overall majority. And that same phrase on the Sunday Telegraph, Sturgeon falls short of majority in Scotland as Labour civil war erupts. The Mail on Sunday, even more full-throatedly pro-union. Prime Minister, it's time for unity. But look at the Scottish front pages. Very, very different in tone indeed. There's Scotland on Sunday. Sturgeon's Indy Ref 2 vow after her historic victory. The people have spoken, says the Sunday National. That is basically a pro-SNP, pro-independence newspaper, very, very firmly assuming that the Indy Ref 2 is going to happen, the independence referendum. And finally, the Herald there, landslide, it says. That's a very, very clear view of what's going on here. There's a very, very different view amongst the Scottish newspapers and the English papers. Finally, one paper which takes a totally different story. The other big story overnight is The Observer. Angela Rayner quotes, fired, quotes, because we don't quite know what's happened to her as Labour get gripped by post-poll rancour. And the Labour Party is in a state of some turmoil this morning. But let's start, Glenn, by talking about Scotland. As I say, very, very divided front pages. Is it a great SNP landslide taking Scotland towards a second independence referendum, or are the SNP genuinely sad to have fallen short?
Well, the Sunday Mail tries to capture the result with our future in our hands, recognising that the SNP have won the election and that together with the Greens in the Scottish Parliament have this independence majority, the largest since 2011, when, of course, the SNP did have its outright win.
And in terms of the Scottish vote, actually a very, very high turnout and a very high vote for the SNP. I think the highest of any party in Scotland or England for a very long time.
Yeah, that's right, and they would argue that that strengthens their case for an independence referendum in the next 5 years, and both the SNP and the Greens had an explicit commitment to it in their manifesto. In the editorial in the Sunday Times, though, they are pointing out that in terms of voters overall, split right down the middle, almost exactly 50-50 between nationalist and unionist, which is pretty much the split on the question of independence, according to the polls.
Well, I was going to ask about that, because the polls have actually, if anything, nudged a little bit against independence recently, only marginally. Does that mean that the SNP, you think, is going to core canny a bit in terms of the timing of this referendum?
Well, the one thing that I think Nicola Sturgeon and Boris Johnson agree on is that tackling the pandemic is the priority. And if you look at both the Scottish and the UK edition of the Mail on Sunday today, we must unite as Team UK, PM urges Sturgeon. He's written to her, urging her and other devolved leaders to join him in a summit to try and agree the way forward in tackling coronavirus and building the recovery. I'm sure Nicola Sturgeon will be happy to agree to that, but their fundamental divide on independence and Indy Ref 2 is a showdown that's coming over the next few years.
Do you think this is going to end in the courts?
I think that is likely right now, that if the UK government isn't going to agree a referendum, Nicola Sturgeon intends to get an independence referendum bill through the Scottish Parliament. She has a majority for that, daring Boris Johnson or someone to challenge it in the courts. But that could get messy and risky for both sides, because
you never know what's going to happen. Once you go into the court, it's easy.
The courts strike it down. Yes, that blocks a referendum, but it could become a recruiting advert for the independence movement. If the court allows the referendum to go ahead, it could still be boycotted by the unionist side and delegitimised in that way. The only way to have a successful referendum is for the two sides to agree.
Really interesting. Anushka Asthana, let's turn to the other huge story of the day, the aftermath of that shattering Labour defeat in Hartlepool and amongst some other the English councils. I know that you spent some time in Hartlepool, and I know you've been looking very closely at the papers. But it's been an extraordinary night, hasn't it? Because Angela Rayner was fired from some of her roles kind of late last night, and then in the middle of the night, Andy Burnham, the successful Manchester mayor, tweeted that he did not support that. In short, what's going on?
Well, there's loads of recriminations in all sorts of different directions about what actually went wrong in Hartlepool. And I've got this spread here from the Mirror that looks at some of this from the Sunday Mirror. You know, you've got Peter Mandelson there on the one hand arguing that the party's not far enough away from Corbyn. On the other hand, you've got those on the left pointing out that they did much better under Corbyn in 2017. I'll talk to you about Angela Rayner in a sec, but in the meantime, there are changes underway likely today. We are being told that, you know, Annalisa Dodds is expected to be demoted from the Shadow Chancellor role, an idea that she was perhaps too anonymous. Rachel Reeves likely to get a promotion. Lisa Nandy from Wigan, where the results were pretty good, being talked about for a more domestic role. Jonathan Ashworth maybe being moved from health. talks about people like Yvette Cooper, Wes Streeting. I mean, the Angela Rayner thing, because she was chair, comes down to arguments about what actually went wrong in Hartlepool. You know, there are briefings from her side and from the other side about who was actually to blame. And as you said, I spent some time up there, not just in this campaign, but in 2019. And the thing I would say, Andrew, is it is quite complicated. There are things going on there that are happening in all sorts of red wall seats. You know, for example, voters perhaps more socially conservative than the Labour has been sounding in recent years. But there are things that are very specific to a place like Hartlepool. I mean, the number one thing we heard when we were up there was our hospital has been hollowed out. The magistrate court has been closed. There are no longer police cells in Hartlepool. And although you can have an argument about who's to blame for that, when a town's had a Labour MP for 57 years, Labour was seen as the incumbent. The other thing that came up after that was infighting in the local council, and Ben Houchen. I'm not actually surprised at all by his result, because he was definitely seen as a positive thing in the town. So it is a long and complicated story. I think Labour know that, but right now they're facing this devastating loss, and there is clearly a lot of recriminations about what went wrong.
Anushka, let me ask you about Ben Houchen, because if you look at what Boris Johnson is now promising for northern voters, you know, more investment in training, more investment in education, people are not going to have to leave these northern towns any longer to find good jobs, more investment in infrastructure, that whole levelling up agenda. This is very close to being a traditional northern Labour strategy. It seems to me that Labour doesn't have very many places it can go at the moment.
Well, perhaps they don't in the northeast right now, where Ben Houchen romped home. But then again, as you pointed out at the beginning, Andy Burnham romped home in the northwest. So I think it is actually perhaps more complicated than it sometimes looks. But one thing we definitely heard in the northeast was that there was this idea that Ben Houchen had essentially promised stuff and then delivered it, which is why you're getting the stuff you're talking about here in the Sunday Times from Boris Johnson, this idea that there's going to be a speech on Tuesday where he's going to try and cement some of this realignment, as he would like to put it. So, you know, for example, those investments that you're talking about, they will have to be long term. I mean, one interesting thing that came out after the election was actually a Twitter thread from Dominic Cummings on all of this, who was quite critical of Keir Starmer, no surprise there, but actually suggested that the Tories did well, perhaps partly because of the vaccine programme, and said nothing is inevitable. You know, in reality, elections are often about narratives, and this narrative is very, very bad for Labour right now. But narratives can change quite quickly. I mean, I was amazed by this stat that someone told me the other day, that the difference between Theresa May's disaster in 2017 and Boris Johnson's triumph in 2019 was just over 300,000 votes.
That's well worth reflecting on, Anushka. Thank you very much. Glenn, let me just come back to Scotland and let me ask you a little bit about Nicola Sturgeon, who will be joining us very shortly in the studio. There's an interesting column there by Ian McWhirter in the Sunday Herald, which argues that she is naturally a cautious politician and isn't going to go rushing into any kind of referendum quickly. But I'm also interested in the Labour story and how that plays in Scotland, because she was very clear in her speech yesterday that part of the reason to back independence, back the SNP, was if you don't do that, you're going to have a perpetual Tory government. People we didn't vote for, we don't like, you know, they're pro-Brexit, all of that stuff, south of the border. Now, the worse Labour does south of the border, in a sense, the stronger her case is, isn't it?
It adds to her argument that the prospect of a UK-wide Labour government, which some in the SNP and the wider movement would welcome and certainly would prefer to a Conservative government, is further and further into the future, and she will use that, no doubt, to make the case for independence. As Ian McWhirter is arguing here in the Herald, that we shouldn't expect NDREF too soon. Now, his argument is, first of all, that Nicola Sturgeon's cautious. She wants to be in a position to
the polls right.
Yeah,
first.
she wants to be in a position to win a referendum, not just to hold a referendum, but also that her priority is to deal with the pandemic. She said that repeatedly throughout the election campaign, including in the second BBC debate the other day. And he reckons that those in her own party who are most impatient and might cause her some trouble over any delay have actually split off to the Alba party with Alex Salmond, which proved unsuccessful in winning seats. I would add a couple of things, a couple of other reasons why we shouldn't maybe expect the referendum anytime soon. One is that the Scottish Government has a lot of work to do on the case. What is independence from a post-Brexit UK? And you discovered that when it comes to questions of borders, when you interviewed Nicola Sturgeon recently, they've got a lot of work to do there. And of course, whilst the SNP and the Greens together have a mandate for another independence referendum, there's this big question over whether they have the power or can secure unequivocal power to hold it.
Very interesting. Very briefly, Anushka, because we're almost out of time. For an awful lot of people, it's the announcement on hugging tomorrow that will be the most important thing.
Isn't it wonderful? We're all going to be able to hug soon. And also this does feed into, doesn't it, the politics as well, because that feel-good thing that we've got right now is very exciting. I had my vaccine this week. I have to say I felt almost a bit teary as I walked in to get it. But just one big caveat, things are terrible across the world right now when it comes to COVID. You know, I've got relatives in India and it's very sad. And I was reading on Twitter, a head teacher in West London talking about having 6 cases of the variant they found in India there. So very excited to hug people, but I think we also have to all be very cautious.
Both the excitement and the caveat, very, very important. Anushka Asthana, Glenn Campbell, thanks both very much indeed. Now then, the weather. Some gorgeous, warm sunshine over the last few days in the east of Scotland, but here in Glasgow yesterday, it was bone-chillingly cold and wet. What's next across the whole UK? Over to Susan Powell in the Weather Centre. Susan.
Thanks very much, Andrew. We're going to lose the cold air from across the UK, yes, for the week ahead, but I'm afraid, sorry, can't get rid of those showers for you. This chap is going to be governing the scene through the next 5 days. It's pulled a lot of milder air a long way north across the UK now from the Atlantic. So it should feel a little milder in Glasgow today, but swirling close to that low pressure centre will be a lot of showers. For Western Scotland, some more persistent rain to the north, quite a few showers for Northern Ireland as well, and blustery winds today, gusty, especially for Northern Ireland. Further south, quite a lot of sunshine across England and Wales, but some showers returning to the west later in the afternoon. Pretty warm in the east with some sunshine, 20 or 21 degrees. But warm, humid air means that these showers pulling in overnight could be heavy and thundery across eastern England. The showers towards the west ease back a little overnight. On the plus side, it is a mild night. We lose the overnight frosts for the week ahead, but the low is still with us for Monday. That means the threat of perhaps some more persistent rain for the northeast of Scotland, certainly I think for the Northern Isles, and showers for the rest of us on Monday. Some decent spells of sunshine in between though, and at least we're finally talking about average temperatures, which is an improvement on recent days.
Thanks very much. Not perhaps the cheeriest part of the Andrew Marr show this morning, the weather. Now, Keir Starmer said he takes full responsibility for Labour's poor performance in the elections in England. But to last night, to the fury of many in the party, he appears to have sacked Angela Rayner as party chair and election coordinator. He can't sack her from her elected position as deputy leader of the Labour Party, but overnight there have been signs that things are coming apart. Andy Burnham, the mayor of Manchester, tweeted about Angela Rayner, "I can't support this. Trouble ahead." I'm going to speak now to John McDonnell, Jeremy Corbyn's former Chancellor, Shadow Chancellor, and to Anna Sarwar, the Labour Party leader here in Scotland. He lost 2 seats yesterday, but he says the party are now on the right path. John McDonnell, first of all, I don't know if you had a chance to talk to Angela Rayner. Do you know whether she has been sacked or not? There seems to be some confusion this morning.
No, I haven't spoken to Angie. Let me be clear, I have no brief for Angie. I didn't support her as deputy leader. I supported Richard Bergen. But when the leader of the party on Friday says he takes full responsibility for the election result in Hartlepool in particular, and then scapegoats Angie Rayner, I think many of us feel that was unfair, particularly as we all know, actually, the way Keir's style of leadership is that his office controls everything. Is very centralised, and he controlled the campaign. So I think many of us just think that it's really unfair. And what public relations genius just thought this was a good move on the very day, actually, we were having successes. You know, Andy Burnham in Manchester, Steve Rotherham, Liverpool, Paul Dunnett in Salford, Marvin done in Bristol, Sadiq in London. The very day we're actually recovering a bit and having successes, then they do this. I just think it's a huge mistake.
OK. Looking at the overall scene this morning, do you think Keir Starmer can win a general election for the Labour Party?
I think what Keir needs to do, look, the Labour Party, things can turn. The Labour Party can win the next general election, of course it can. But what Keir needs to do now is stand by what he said 12 months ago when people supported him, which is he will unite the party. And I'm afraid he hasn't done that. And last night's measures will divide it even further. Still not allowing Jeremy Corbyn to have the whip, I think is just ridiculous. But also, he did say he'd build upon the policy framework we set out. And he hasn't. We went into this election for 12 months of a slogan under new leadership, but with no policy programme whatsoever. You can't send candidates naked into the field like that without any policy.
So do you think the Labour Party would be better off under, for instance, Andy Burnham? Look,
I don't get into who's best in any position or anything like that. I just, these words are, I'm trying to play this role, as you know, elder statesman, and I am playing that role. I just give these words of advice for Keir. Look, the party was based upon solidarity. Injury to one is injury to all. United we stand, divided we fall. And I think at the moment, Keir, and particularly those apparatchiks around him and his advisors like Peter Mandelson and others, they're straining that concept and commitment to solidarity within the party, and in that way unnecessarily dividing the party.
There will be some people, John McDonnell, however avuncular you are being, who wonder after the last election result whether you're really the person to be lecturing Keir Starmer on how to win elections.
Well, I'm exactly the person. You interviewed me, I think it was about 48 hours after we lost last election. And I said to you, I take responsibility for that. That's what you do in leadership. You take responsibility. You don't scapegoat and blame others. You take it on the chin. You own it. And that's what I did. And actually, you learn lessons in when you lose an election like that. And part of my role is actually trying to say, look, this is the lessons we've got to learn. And I'm trying to do it constructively. I'm not trying to divide the party. I'm trying to say to those around Keir in particular, stop dividing us. Now's the time to unite and build upon those policies that were popular and that actually got Keir elected leader of the party.
All right. Anna Sarwar, you heard John McDonnell there. Can I ask you, first of all, do you know whether Angela Rayner has been sacked from any of her positions or not?
Look, my understanding is that Angelina's going to take a different position in the shadow cabinet. But can I say right from the outset, she has been a fantastic deputy leader. I'm proud she's deputy leader of our UK party, and I know she's got a huge. She was in charge of elections. Has she been promoted or has she been demoted? Well, look, I'm not in charge of who promotes who and what in Westminster. I'm in charge of the party here in Scotland. But the bottom line is that Angela Rayner is a huge talent. We're lucky to have her as our deputy leader across the UK. I know how closely I was pleased to work with her from here in Scotland, and I know she's got a huge future. Was she responsible for these terrible election results, or was Keir Starmer responsible for these terrible election results? Well, it depends where you're talking about. I think different people take different responsibility. I take responsibility in Scotland. I'm sure Mark Rakeford will take responsibility in Wales. But I think so who takes responsibility in England? Well, I think Keir Starmer has already said ultimately he takes responsibility in England. But if you look at different parts of England, I think we praise Andy Burnham for the campaign in Liverpool. We should praise Sadiq Khan for the campaign in London. We shouldn't just look at one part and think that represents the whole of England. That suits other people's narratives. My question is very straightforward. Should we blame Angela Rayner for what happened in England or not? Look, no one person can take a blame, and it's wrong to put a blame. And I don't think anyone is putting blame on one person. Because a lot of people think that your leader has been scapegoating Angela Rayner in a very unfair way. Look, I don't think you can scapegoat anybody. I don't think anyone is saying that one person is to blame. It's a collective effort, and we've all got to collectively pull this Labour Party together, like I'm doing in Scotland. Yeah. So in Scotland, we are on a journey to get the Labour Party back to being a credible alternative. That's what Keir's doing. It's quite a long journey, and you took 2 steps back yesterday, didn't you? Well, it depends where you look at where we were 10 weeks ago. I think anyone that's followed politics closely in Scotland over the last few years will have seen the immense progress we have made in the last 10 weeks. We've got Labour back on the pitch again. And I'm saying directly to people, this is a journey. We're building the credible alternative to the SNP. That journey didn't stop in the election, and if you want to be part of that journey, join me.
Can I ask you about the election results in England, which were terrible, terrible results across most of England, particularly the north? That affects you, doesn't it? Because when Nicola Sturgeon stands up and says either you support independence and the SNP or you in Scotland are condemned to semi-perpetual rule by the Conservatives in London, she has a point, doesn't she?
Well, she does say that, but she'll point to Liverpool, but she won't point to... Sorry, she'll point to Hartlepool, but she won't point to Liverpool. She'll point to Hartlepool, but she won't...
numbers are pretty clear.
She'll point to Hartlepool, but she won't point to London. She'll point to Hartlepool, she won't point to Wales. So we can't say there's a homogenous England or a homogenous Wales or a homogenous Scotland.
I could mention Durham, which lost, where Labour lost control for the first time in its history.
Absolutely, and we've got a huge task ahead of us to rebuild the Labour Party so we have the opportunity to serve the country that we all love. That's what I'm doing here in Scotland. I know that's what Keir's aspiring to do across the rest of the UK.
And do you believe that Keir Starmer is the right man to be leading the Labour Party now?
Absolutely, and I think we shouldn't be having these internal discussions. We can't look at each other. We've got to look outward and forward looking across the country, and we've got to make a credible case based on authenticity, on humility and energy and ideas. And I would urge colleagues across the rest of the UK, learn the difficult lessons from the mistakes we made in Scotland. Don't pull each other apart. Don't think there's a quick constitutional fix. Instead, let's win on the politics of hope,
Your colleagues, I'm sure, across the rest of the country are listening to this interview. Over the past 12 hours or so, we've had something like mayhem in terms of communications from the Labour Party. Who's up, who's down? Is there a reshuffle? Isn't there a reshuffle? Who's in, who's out? Do you think it's been well handled?
Well, I don't see that mayhem in the Scottish Labour Party. I'm still to decide if we're going to have a reshuffle here in Scotland.
About the UK party, as you know very well.
But in the rest of the UK, look, Keir's made a very serious point. We are on a journey. We've got a really difficult task ahead of us. We have a mountain to climb if we are to elect a Labour government across the UK, and we've got to take urgent action. I know Angela Rayner is going to be at the heart of that.
All right, Anna Sarwar, I will let you put on your climbing boots. John McDonnell, thanks very much indeed for joining us as well. Now then, there are reports this morning that the next stage of the relaxation of COVID rules will allow overnight stays, a big relaxation of social distancing measures, and hugging your friends and family. While case numbers are right down across the UK, they're still soaring in other parts of the world, with India's health system in a dire state. I spoke earlier this morning to Professor Andrew Pollard, who is director of the Oxford Vaccine Institute, which brought us the AstraZeneca jab. And I began by asking him, is it safe for people to hug their friends and family on the 17th of May?
Well, I think we've seen an absolutely extraordinary success of both the vaccine programme and also the suppression of cases as a result of this very prolonged lockdown we've had. And so I think it is time to start, based on the very careful modelling that's been done, to start relaxing some of those restrictions. And I think that means that we're in a very fortunate position here in the UK.
We see at the moment a lot of talk about a major booster programme in the autumn against new variants and much else here. But around the rest of the world, we are seeing something like a human catastrophe, for instance, in India. So it's a question of what is more important, boosters for us in the autumn or vaccinating the so far unvaccinated world?
Well, you're absolutely right. We are facing an absolute calamity. Today, around 30,000 people will die in the world from COVID. That's from the Institute for Health Metrics in Seattle. And those numbers are increasing. That we'll have a peak in deaths in this current global wave towards the end of this month, and we'll be just shy of 1 million deaths this month. So the question isn't really about boosters in the autumn, it's about what we can do today so that we're not standing by while this happens. And because history won't look kindly on us if 1 million people die this month and we haven't acted. Countries that have now vaccinated the vast majority of the vulnerable need to be rethinking priorities. We are in a very joined up global community, and we just can't stand by and seeing that level of catastrophe happen.
So to put it very briefly and brusquely, the unvaccinated world first, boosters second.
Well, I think it's a slightly nuanced issue. We're not talking about boosters today, because the boosters are something which we have to make decisions on when we have more evidence about the need for them. The point today is the doses that are available today need to be focused from a global health perspective on those who are going to die this month. And that's absolutely critical. We can't allow this to happen and stand by with that huge death rate that we're seeing at the moment globally.
On Friday, the JCVI said that people under 40 shouldn't be given the AstraZeneca vaccine if there was another one available. Do you support that decision?
Well, I think it really speaks to the extraordinary position we're in here in the UK, where we are so well protected against COVID that we have the luxury of making decisions to absolutely minimise any risks through the vaccine programme. But the key point is that in most countries of the world, there is little choice or no choice of vaccine. And that's what we have to focus on today, is how do we get those doses to those countries? There are, with our vaccine, now about 165 countries where the vaccine has been distributed. Of the global production, about a third of it is coming from AstraZeneca. And that is because of the extraordinary efforts there have been to put in place a global manufacturing network that allows doses to be made at over 20 manufacturing sites.
Can I ask about people under 40 who've already had the first AstraZeneca jab and may be reluctant to have a second AstraZeneca jab? Will they get a different jab for the second dose?
Well, the current JCVI advice is that there is not a signal of this very rare clotting problem with second doses, and that people should continue to have their second doses. I think that's very reassuring information that came out on Friday from the JCVI and the MHRA, who've been reviewing the safety.
With all the data now looking so positive and the vaccine inoculation programme working so well, do you think we can look forward to a time where there will be no social distancing and no more masks?
I think that there is a future with no social distancing and no more masks, but from a global perspective, we're still a long way from that. So yes, here in the UK, we've had remarkable success through the vaccine programme, and so that is getting closer to happening. But from a global perspective, there's such a long way to go.
Professor Pollard, this week the Biden administration in Washington backed the WHO, calling for a temporary suspension of patents for the vaccines. Now, clearly the companies are not happy about this because that cuts profits. What's your view?
Well, I think it's an absolutely laudable concept to have a waiver over the intellectual property rights to allow greater use of the vaccines around the world. There clearly is already a political debate about this, and there will be commercial interests at stake. But the critical point here is that that discussion has to happen. But the impact of it, if it were to come forward in the next weeks or months to actually be real, then means that there's a huge heavy lifting to do with manufacturing facilities that are currently available, and there aren't very many of them around the world, to transfer the technology, get the supplies in them. And it'll take the rest of this year before we start seeing large amounts of production. So here at Oxford University, we took a slightly different approach, which was to find a partner in AstraZeneca who were prepared, not for profit, to make a distributed manufacturing network with over 20 manufacturing sites. And they've spent the last year with this incredibly complex process of transferring the technology of how to make these biological products. And they're still working with each of those sites at the moment and achieving that. That's why the vaccine is in over 160 countries because of this enormous effort.
Andrew Pollard, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
As Cabinet Office Minister, Michael Gove's taken responsibility for Brexit, recovery from the pandemic, and now his latest job is to save the Union. No easy task, perhaps. He's with me in Glasgow this morning. Welcome, Mr Gove.
Morning, Andrew.
I don't know if you saw it, but Nicola Sturgeon made a very stalwart speech yesterday in which he was absolutely clear that the freshly elected Scottish Parliament is going to pass legislation for a new independence referendum. Straightforward question. Will you take it to court to stop it?
No. The first thing that I should say is...
No, you won't take it to court.
The first thing I should say is congratulations to Nicola. She has secured, with 64 MSPs, a significant election victory, and I want to congratulate her on that. And I also want to take the opportunity to congratulate the new members of the Scottish Parliament who've been elected, a more diverse group than ever before, representing different traditions and communities in Scotland, showing that democracy in Scotland is healthy. The other thing that is critically important, however, is an acknowledgement on the part of all of us as political leaders, whatever parties we come from, that the priority at the moment is not court cases, it's not independence legislation, it is recovery from the pandemic. And to be fair to the First Minister, to be fair to Nicola Sturgeon, during the course of this election campaign, she said that was the single most important thing that we should all be concentrating on. And we should work together as Team UK in order to deal with the pandemic.
I'm going to come on to the pandemic and indeed the timing later on, but I asked you whether you would take her to court if she had another independence referendum legislated for, and you said no.
We're not going near there.
You said no.
We're not going near there. What we are concentrating...
You're not going to take her to court?
No,
that's a very important matter, because that is the one place you could stop her.
I'll tell you what,
one place you could stop her.
I'll tell you what is a truly important matter, to my mind, and that is the fact that we have a backlog in the NHS. There are tens of thousands of people who deserve and need treatment who haven't been able to get it because of the pandemic. It is also the case that there are children who have been out of school and who've lost learning across the whole of the United Kingdom.
All of that absolutely crucial.
So I'm not going to get into...
The future of the United Kingdom is, I think you would agree, a matter of some moment. And the one place, it's not an if anymore, the Scottish Parliament is going to legislate for another independence referendum. That's crystal clear. And Nicola Sturgeon has said, in effect, that if Boris Johnson wants to stop it, I will see you in court. The question is, will she see you in court or not?
No, she'll see me talking to her.
She won't see you in court.
She'll see me talking to her next week about how we recover from the pandemic. Because I think, you know, my mum waking up in Aberdeen this morning will not be thinking, do you know what? I really hope that Nicola Sturgeon uses her this term in Parliament to press for an independence referendum. She won't be thinking that. She'll be thinking, how can we make sure that my grandchildren get the education and the job opportunities that they deserve? She'll be thinking, how can we make sure that a situation where we've seen in Scotland not just waiting lists in the NHS, but also record drug deaths, how can politicians work together on those? And again, to be fair to the First Minister, she acknowledged during the election that this had to be the priority. And again, the First Minister, also during the election, when she was pressed specifically by Glenn Campbell, your guest earlier, what if someone wants to vote for you to see continuity in the fight against the pandemic, but doesn't believe in independence? Well, what should they do? And Nicola said, well, they should vote for me. So it is clear that the result in Wales, and we have to congratulate Mark Drakeford, and in England and in Scotland, the result of all of these elections was an instruction to politicians. Thank you for the vaccination programme. The UK government has delivered that across the whole country. Now, please concentrate on recovery.
Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP said in their manifesto, vote for us and we will legislate for another independence referendum. The Green Party said exactly the same thing. They have a clear, big majority, or good majority in the new Scottish Parliament to do that. They have a mandate, do they not, for another referendum?
Well, I think you need to look at what was said during the campaign. When Nicola was asked during the campaign about Scotland's drug deaths, she, again, to her credit, said that the Scottish Government had taken their eye off the ball on this issue. We need to work together in order to deal with that problem. And what we cannot afford is anyone taking their eye off the ball when it comes to recovery, when it comes to investment in the NHS, by having a conversation about, a protracted conversation about the Constitution. That's the first point. The second point to bear in mind is that a majority of people who voted in the constituencies voted for parties that were opposed to a referendum.
An election is an election, even under the slightly strange rules for the Scottish Parliament, designed to try and stop somebody getting an overall majority, and the SNP did very well. They got 47%, which is a lot higher, nearly 10% higher than David Cameron's government got, for instance. When you were in part of that government, in your manifesto, you said, vote for us and we will have a Brexit referendum. And people voted for you, and you did have a Brexit referendum, and the rest is history. What is different this time? The SNP said, vote for us, there will be a referendum. They did vote for them, and there is going to be a referendum.
A significant number of things are different. The first and most important is, of course, the pandemic. And we absolutely need to be laser-focused on making sure the vaccination programme continues to be a success and that we work together on recovery. The second thing that's different is that, again, I congratulate Nicola on her success, But she didn't secure a majority, as Alex Salmond did in 2011. And that is a significant difference. The other thing is that when Alex Salmond secured that majority...
There's a majority for independence.
No, Andrew, you asked me a multi-part question, so I'll give you the comprehensive answer. The second part is that Alex Salmond, when he requested a referendum, every party in the Scottish Parliament agreed that it was appropriate to have a referendum, given that he had secured a majority. It is not the case now, as we see, that the people of Scotland are agitating for a referendum.
There is actually a bigger pro-independence majority in this Parliament than there was in that one. And the numbers involved, the numbers of people who voted for the SNP and the Greens are very large, larger than voted for. Can I ask you a very straightforward philosophical question?
Yes.
Is Scotland allowed to leave the UK?
Of course it is.
It is.
Yes.
So how?
Well, through a legal referendum, which would allow people to make that choice. But again, Andrew, it's also the case...
So we've got a legal referendum which you said you won't challenge in court, so we are making progress here. That's a very important moment.
Well,
we're coming closer to this referendum than we've ever been before.
Two things. The first thing is it's also the case that the Scottish Conservatives secured the highest vote that they ever have. That was not acknowledged, I think, either in your question or on the press review earlier.
Let me acknowledge it in this way, then. Let me acknowledge it.
But also, you're so anxious, Andrew, to go down this particular route, and that's because you and others think that, entirely understandably, because there's high drama associated with it, that the debate in Scotland should be focused on the constitutional question. But it is not...
It's where we are this morning.
No, it's not.
It's
where you are. It's not where Scotland is.
It's where the SNP are, and they've won the election.
No, the people of Scotland
you mentioned the
made it perfectly clear during this campaign that their priorities were recovery, jobs,
and a second independence referendum.
No, they did not.
They
made it
for
perfectly.
Which are in favour.
They voted for a party which was working with us in the UK government in order to deliver a recovery, as they did in Wales. And you acknowledged earlier, as Nicola Sturgeon did, that there were people who voted because they wanted to make sure that Nicola Sturgeon was working with us to concentrate on recovery. But you have a very clear particular desire to drive this debate and lead the country down a particular route, which is not shared by the majority of people.
I'm just interested in what's going to happen next. You mentioned the Scottish Conservatives.
We're going to work on recovery next.
You mentioned the Scottish Conservatives.
We're going to focus relentlessly on the NHS next.
OK, the Scottish Conservatives said again and again during this campaign, vote for us because we're the only party you can be sure will vote against a second referendum. And the Scottish public listened to that and looked around and thought, do you know what, we're going to vote for the SNP instead. They had the choice and they voted for the SNP and for the Greens, who are also in favour of a second referendum. And there's a very clear democratic result. They have a mandate, I put it to you, for that second referendum. You may not like it, but they have a mandate.
It is also the case that people voted for the Scottish Labour Party, for the Scottish Liberal Democrats. And as I mentioned earlier, in the constituencies, more people voted for parties that were opposed to a referendum. And you're selectively choosing an issue which you're perfectly entitled to.
Went big on.
Well, and indeed secured, as I was about to point out, more votes for the Scottish Conservatives than at any point previously. But the broader question is politics is about priorities. That was what Nye Bevan said. And what are the priorities that we have at the moment? The priority that the UK government has is working together in order to ensure that the massive increase in NHS waiting lists, the number of hours that children have lost at school, and the lags in the criminal justice system that mean that people have been denied justice are all addressed. And are you saying to me that those are not the most important questions at the moment? Are you trying to suggest that this is not the priority for all politicians at the moment? Because if you want to jump ahead, years ahead, and to look at future speculation about the Constitution, that is fair enough and it's legitimate, but it's not where the public are.
Well, the public, all I would say is the public have voted for two parties, promising them again and again a second independence referendum. That's the way the vote went.
The First Minister made it perfectly clear that her priority would be recovery from the COVID pandemic.
She did.
She's meeting the Prime Minister, presumably. And that's what we'll be concentrating on.
So she is
the Prime Minister wrote to the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales, suggested that we meet and work together as Team UK in order to resolve these problems. And again, I suspect, though I can't be certain, that the overwhelming majority of people in this country will find it curious that when we're in the middle of recovering from the biggest health crisis that this country has faced, when we face an economic challenge like no other, when we have significant damage in our public services as a result of this pandemic, that people should want to talk about what's going to happen in the Supreme Court in a few years' time. People will think, honestly, what's got into these folk? They should be concentrating on the issues that matter now.
Well, let's turn to COVID. You and I both know as well as each other that taking Nicola Sturgeon to the Supreme Court would be a PR disaster for the union case, and that's perhaps why you're cautious about it. Let me move on, however, to COVID. As you say, the Prime Minister...
I'm interested in making sure that we have all of the resources of the entire United Kingdom devoted to the Senate. I'm here in Scotland over the next few days as a UK government minister because Scotland has two governments, and we want to make sure that we're working with local authorities, with doctors and nurses in the NHS, in order to resolve that. I don't think, if I were to walk down Sauchiehall Street this afternoon, there'd be many people who would say, "Oh, Michael, what about the Supreme Court?" I don't think that would be the issue of greatest concern to them. What they want to see is the opportunity, which we will have this week and next week, and in weeks and months to come, for our governments to cooperate. And indeed, every week, I hold a call with the First Minister of Scotland, the First Minister of Wales, the First Minister of Northern Ireland and the Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland. We have pragmatic, business-like conversations, and that is what I think people will want to see at a time when the pressures on all of us as a result of this pandemic need to be overcome together.
You were in the room when some people say the Prime Minister said that he would rather see the bodies pile high in their thousands than have another lockdown. Did he say it or anything like that?
No, of course not.
Because my colleague Laura Koonsberg says that she has spoken to people who were in the room and are going to go on the record saying that he did. But from what you know, that cannot be the case.
No, I was in the room with the Prime Minister when we were debating the measures that we had to take towards the end of last year. I wouldn't ordinarily talk about the conversations that you'd have in a Cabinet Committee, but given the nature of the speculation that there's been, I think it's fair to address it. And no, we did have a debate because, of course, as the Prime Minister's pointed out, locking your economy down is a big step. It's a major step. But at the same time, the overwhelming evidence in front of us was that unless we took that step, the NHS would be overwhelmed. And the Prime Minister took part in that debate, as you'd expect us all to, soberly and seriously, weighing difficult decisions.
So nothing like that? Nothing like that?
No.
OK, let's turn to COVID itself.
Yes.
Are we going to see an end to a ban or restrictions on hugging, touching each other, going into each other's houses coming this week?
Yes, we're going to see, all being well, the Prime Minister will confirm tomorrow that there will be a relaxation. We've already indicated a proportionate relaxation on international travel, very, very limited at this stage because we have to be safe. And in the same way as we move into stage 3 of our roadmap, it will be the case that we will see people capable of meeting indoors. And without prejudice to a broader review of social distancing, it is also the case that friendly contact, intimate contact between friends and family is something that we want to see restored.
From the 17th of May or thereabouts, hugging, as we call it.
Yes.
All right, let's move on to another subject that's interesting a lot of people, which is mask wearing by pupils in schools.
Yes.
Is that going to end?
Well, we're reviewing the evidence at the moment, and of course, what we want to do is, throughout, is to balance public health with making sure that we can return to normal as quickly as possible. So I won't preempt that judgment. We'll be saying more about it shortly.
Gavin Williamson told the Telegraph that it would be ending.
I won't preempt the official judgment.
All right, let's turn to a widening. It's quite clear that coronavirus is changing lots of aspects of life, whether it's election, all sorts of things. It would be strange, would it not, if the Treasury were not looking again at some of the big infrastructure decisions, such as HS2. Far fewer people are travelling to and from work than before. That must have consequences for the way we spend money in this country.
Well, I think what's critical is making sure that actually we provide the investment overall that we need to spread economic opportunity more equally. And HS2 is going to ensure that travel along the spine of the whole UK is faster, more effective and more efficient. And I don't think it's a case of either or. I think we also need to make sure that we invest in digital infrastructure as well. And one of the things that we will be doing through the Levelling Up Fund, which is a UK-wide fund, is making sure that it's not just big infrastructure projects like HS2 that we invest in, but we're also looking to work with the Scottish Government, Scottish Local Government, Welsh Government and others in order to make sure that we can better connect the whole UK through transport.
Yes, your Levelling Up paper from the Treasury Treasury says very specifically that from Westminster you're going to be dealing directly with local authorities in Scotland, not with the Scottish Assembly or the Scottish Parliament or with the Scottish Government. Now, does that mean that you are trying to put the Scottish Parliament back in its box?
Certainly not. We want to work with both. I think it's critically important that we work with the Scottish Government and also with local government as well. And we've already seen opportunities to do just that. When we announced that we were going to work with both Holyrood but also local authorities, I think it was the leader of the of Glasgow Council, an SNP politician, who welcomed that, along with the leaders of Aberdeen Council and the Borders Council, and so on. To my mind, it's an example, again, of Team UK working together in everyone's interests. And as I mentioned earlier, and as I want to stress, over the course of the whole of the last year in dealing with the pandemic, despite the philosophical differences that I might have with the SNP, or indeed with Mark Drakeford in Wales, we have worked successfully together. The vaccine rollout, enabled by investment that was made by the UK government and supported by the UK Armed Forces, has also, of course, with the Scottish NHS and the Welsh NHS, seen jabs into more arms than any other European country. It is a perfect example of how you can have the best of both worlds. You can have a Scottish Parliament and a Scottish Government working with Westminster to deliver for everyone. And I think, you know, at a time of difficulty and potential division, I think people want unity, and I think that they want to see politicians setting aside some of the issues that may have bedeviled us in the past to work for the greater good.
We're sitting, I'm delighted to say, in Scotland, but here's an English question. Will the Champions League final be able to be held in England rather than in Turkey?
Well, personally speaking, I wouldn't mind if it were held here in Scotland. I wouldn't mind if it were held in Hampton.
Isn't far away, but...
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think for obvious reasons, Hampton would probably be better than Ibrox as a place. But I have an interest to declare. My son is a Chelsea fan, and so he would far rather it were held in the UK. Talks are ongoing. Oliver Dowden, the Culture Secretary, is talking to UEFA and others about that. I think it would be a really good thing, but I don't want to cut across the conversations that Oliver is having.
All right, Michael Gove, thanks very much indeed for coming in to talk to us today.
Not at all. Thank you, Andrew.
This Friday, the historian Mary Beard returns to our screens with a new series of Inside Culture, the BBC topical arts programme, and she'll be exploring post-lockdown themes and asking how culture can help us to emerge from a year of loss and uncertainty. I spoke to Mary a little earlier about her new series, which is looking at the pandemic.
Well, in the first programme, we're thinking about remembering things. Not only the pandemic, we're not going to be rubbing people's noses in COVID the whole time. But in the first programme, I've been talking to the architect David Adjaye about how he builds memorials to things, you know? And I mean, if you think, how will we decide to commemorate the pandemic? You know, well, I don't think it's going to be a sculpture of Chris Whitty, much as he might deserve one. I think we're going to have to be thinking about more imaginative ways of doing that. And that's what David Adjaye is really known for. And recently in London, his memorial to Cherry Gross, the woman who was in the 80s shot by the police in Brixton, was unveiled. And we go and see that and we think about what a good memorial is. Why does a memorial work?
I'm sorry, a very, very difficult question, this, because we're still, in a sense, living through it. But as a historian, how do you think this period of the pandemic should be remembered?
Well, I think that's difficult, and I tend to think about writing as much as about a physical memorial. And I suspect that the novels and the post-COVID novels that are bound to come, I mean, there'll be a good bit of awful tragedy in them, but I suspect it will be kind of lifting the veil on the sort of domestic side and you know, the domestic torture of lockdown, probably. I think there'll be a lot of novels about people's marriages breaking up, you know, as they were cooped up together for a year.
Now, Mary, you've been lassoed and brought on to what is essentially a political programme. And I know a lot of my viewers roll their eyes about politics at the moment, but you've argued recently that we are not living in a uniquely corrupt age in politics. But what's probably the problem is that we're living in a uniquely ill-tempered or bad-tempered age.
Yeah, think so. Much as I deplore people, on the make and sleaze and all that, I think we're being a bit over nostalgic if we think that somehow in the past, every politician was super clean. I think we just didn't see it back then. And I look back to, the 50s and 60s. I suspect things were fixed in just the same way, but they weren't exposed to us. But what I'm more worried about really, is the kind of awful outrage and anger, as if there's a lot to disagree about, and there's a lot we ought to disagree about, but that has to be done in a way that's better than just shouting at each other.
Now, another issue I know you've been looking at, something that affects all of us, if I can say, is learning how to act your age and what that means in terms of what one wears, what one listens to, consumes. We're going through a period where, older people are performing in all sorts of ways. You've got Ian McKellen performing Hamlet and so on and so on. So give us some good advice about acting our age.
Oh, I don't know. We're looking at old age in our third programme because old age has in some ways been a focus of the pandemic. We've been worried about the old, and we've been thinking about the vulnerability of the old. Well, I have a piece of woman's advice, which I'll be trying out on the programme, I think, which is, however old you are, you can always wear shoes of whatever age. And so I'm putting in a plea for bright, joyful, celebratory and entirely impractical sneakers.
That sounds absolutely wonderful. As somebody sitting here in a pair of very, very dour and extremely painful black shoes, I think that could be advice for men as well as for women. Mary Beard, bless you and thank you so much for joining us. For the fourth time in a row, the SNP has won the election here in Scotland. They didn't, however, gain enough seats to rule as a majority government by themselves. An important detail in the ongoing argument over the second independence referendum. My final guest is the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola Sturgeon, welcome. I don't know if you were able to hear Michael Gove talking a little moment ago, but it seemed to me that he was saying that they would not be challenging you in the Supreme Court when things came down to it.
Well, that's what I heard him say, but I think it would be absurd and completely outrageous if it ever got to that point, if it ever got anywhere close to that point. Because remember, for this to end up in court, which is not something I ever want to see, it would mean that a Conservative government had refused to respect the democratic wishes of the Scottish people and the outcome of a democratic election,
which wouldn't
and
tried
to go to the Supreme Court to overturn Scottish democracy. I think it is an understatement to say that that wouldn't play well, but it would also
So do you think perhaps that the British government has heard your argument and rather agreed with it?
I hope so, because it's not really, or it shouldn't be in a democracy, a controversial argument. Michael Gove opposes independence. He's entirely entitled to that view. I support Scottish independence. I'm entitled to that view, but it shouldn't be up to him or I to decide that question. It's up to the Scottish people to decide that question. And in this election, they have voted overwhelmingly for the SNP. And we stood on a manifesto commitment to firstly, and this is where I actually agree with much of what Michael Gove was saying, firstly, to continue to steer the country through the COVID pandemic. I'll be back behind my desk in Butte House this afternoon taking those decisions. But after the crisis, to give the people of Scotland the opportunity to choose our own future in a referendum. And the fact that we're sitting here having a debate about whether or not that outcome is going to be respected says a lot about the lack of respect for Scottish democracy that this UK government has demonstrated over quite some time now.
Of course, we can't be sure what will happen at the court level after the legislation goes through.
Let's hope it doesn't get there.
And it might not be it might not be the British government, it might be somebody else takes you to court. Can I ask you straightforwardly, have you taken legal advice about whether you could win such a court case?
I haven't been planning for a referendum over this past year. I've been focusing on COVID, but anybody who knows anything about the legislative process in the Scottish Parliament knows that any government has to consult its law officers before it brings forward legislation. So that will all be part and parcel of what we do. But I don't want to lose this point, Andrew. So no, we haven't got to the stage of introducing a bill formally, but that will be part and parcel of the process. But can I just be clear, because I think it's important we don't lose sight of this point, that all of this talk about legality and whether or not the UK government would challenge the Scottish government in court misses a point. The people of Scotland have voted for the SNP on the strength of offering, when the time is right, an independence referendum.
Sure.
And as in 2011 leading up to 2014, any UK government that has any respect for Scottish democracy would simply accept that and come to an agreement with the Scottish government that put it beyond any legal doubt.
It misses one point, but it may home in on another point, because all the way through the referendum, the election campaign, you said that you would not support, you would not oversee an illegal referendum, which means that you would have to win such a court case. Now, the Scotland Act 1998, which is the relevant thing, it's on the screen here, is very, very clear. It says right at the top, the following aspects of the Constitution are reserved matters, that is, B, the union of the kingdoms of Scotland and England. That seems in black and white pretty clear. Do you think you could possibly overturn that?
I think you'll find, if you had a range of lawyers in here, I'm sure you would find a range of views on that, and I accept that if it comes to being decided in the courts, then that will be the debate we have to have. Of course, for the union to be dissolved, that would require legislation. The referendum is the way in which you determine whether there is majority support in Scotland for that. So yes, I don't sit here and argue that there is not a debate about that. But the point here, and it is an important point not to simply skip over, in the previous referendum in the run-up to 2014, what happened was that the UK government agreed that there was a mandate for a referendum, and we agreed jointly to put that beyond legal doubt. That is what should happen this time, when the Scottish Parliament decides the time is right for a referendum, which is not right now, but after the crisis. Because
you have said you would not have an illegal referendum.
Indeed.
If you don't win that case, then it's game over, isn't it?
Well, look, again, this whole debate is predicated on a situation where a UK government refuses to accept Scottish democracy. And what that means is that you have a UK government that is saying that the UK is no longer a union based on consent, that it is no longer a voluntary union, that somehow Scotland is to be retained within that union by force of law. Now, if that is the argument, then we are going into unprecedented territory, and Michael Gove was at pains to say that Scotland, of course, did have the democratic right, if it chose so, to become independent. So
I'm not denying in any sense the force of that argument. I'm just saying this is where you might end up. And I'd just like to quote you Judge David Hope, who's former Deputy President of the Supreme Court, and he says they, meaning the SNP, are trapped within a statute which is very carefully drafted.
Look, if the argument, and I'm not talking about David Hope here, of course, for whom I've got a lot of respect, and he's not a politician, but if the argument of the unionist side is that Scotland is trapped, then it strikes me that that is one of the strongest arguments for independence. Now, as it happens, and time will tell, Andrew, I accept that, I don't think we'll get anywhere near this. And I think if you listened, as you clearly did because you were asking them the questions, to Michael Gove's answers, they know, the UK government knows, that if we ever get into a situation where this has been determined in the courts, and actually what the UK government is arguing is that there is no democratic route for Scotland to independence, then they're in a very, very bad place. I don't think we will get to that point.
I can hear that you don't want this to happen, and at some level you don't believe it ever will happen.
I don't believe it will.
But it could happen.
Sure.
And if it did happen, you would then be at the end of the road, wouldn't you?
If we get to that point, then Scotland will be in a situation where it is being told that it has no democratic route to become an independent country. Now, you don't have to accept that. Well, you know, the implications of that would be very grave indeed, and I don't think we will get there, because actually...
So what do you think would happen if that happened?
I don't think we will get there, and because I do believe that at a fundamental level, even this Conservative government knows... Look, that would be a very serious situation. I can't sit here and answer that right now, because it would be such a grave and serious and undemocratic situation that I don't believe on either side anybody wants it to get to that point. There is a fundamental issue of democracy at play here. We have just won a landslide. I could sit here, but I'm not going to, because I know you know them, take you through all of the record-breaking statistics of this election. I'm sure I'll do that many times today, whether people want me to or not. But we've just won a landslide election. Now, don't get me wrong here. I am not, and this is where there is perhaps an exaggeration of the difference. I'm not proposing a referendum in this instant right now.
in a second.
and get on to
but nonetheless,
through
a lot of those people who voted for you and the SNP, or indeed for the Scottish Greens, did so on the basis that you were promising them another independence referendum. And there are various routes through to that. But I'm just pointing out that one of the most important routes through to that has a huge blockage, and you don't know, and you can't tell me what would happen if that...
Indeed, but you're sitting here legitimately, and this is not any attempt at a criticism of you or the line of questioning, but all of that is predicated. I'm being asked to answer the question, what do you do if a UK government refuses point blank to accept democracy? Now, that is just an absurd position for anybody to be put into. And the fact that I can't come up with the neat soundbite answer to that is not actually some reason to criticise me. It's a reflection of how outrageous the situation is.
Merely asking the questions. Let me come on to the timing of this, because you've been very clear all the way through that you wanted to get rid of the pandemic as an issue and deal with that first. Now, when do you think that's going to happen?
I'm not going to try and give you a simplistic answer to that. We are in a pandemic. Things are looking pretty good. We are seeing case numbers continue to fall. Vaccination is going well. I said in the manifesto, if COVID conditions allowed, in the first half of the parliamentary term, but the Parliament will have to judge whether that is the case.
Without being simplistic or glib, I hope, the outgoing head of the vaccine task force, Clive Dick, says that he believes that by sometime in August, quotes, we will have no circulating virus in the UK. And in terms of the economic recovery, the Bank of England is saying that GDP is expected to recover strongly to pre-COVID levels over the remainder of this year. Now, if they're both, roughly speaking, right, then by early next year, by the spring of next year, the pandemic issue will be over, be off your desk. Well, is that the point at which you bring independence legislation?
That would certainly work for that timescale of within the first half of this parliamentary term. But I will judge that. I very much, not just for reasons of an independence referendum, but for many more reasons, I desperately hope those predictions are correct. But we have to judge that as we go through this year. We've still got significant challenges ahead. There are still many countries...
But the legislation could land in the Scottish Parliament early next year.
I wouldn't rule that out, but equally I'm not sitting here right now and saying that that is the timescale. The people of Scotland re-elected me as First Minister with the first task of continuing to steer us through this pandemic, getting us into recovery. Then, of course, there is a question about what kind of recovery do we want, what kind of country are we rebuilding to, and that brings into sharp focus. Where do decisions lie? I'm not sure the kind of recovery that Boris Johnson envisages is one that a majority of people in Scotland would support.
Well, let's look at the kind of country an independent Scotland might be. For how long would you be using the pound?
For as long as that was economically in our interests to do that, and we would then move over time to a Scottish currency. But again, these are all the things, you and I had an exchange on this just before the election. These are all things that in a white paper, as we did in 2014, we will lay out fully for the Scottish people. We will, and I'm determined about this point, that we will also lay out frankly the challenges that an independent Scotland would face, the challenges that would come with transition to independence. I'm not saying it would be challenge-free, but it is absolutely the right thing for Scotland because it puts control over our future and the kind of country we become into our own hands.
But not control over your currency or over monetary policy, possibly for years to come. Your own Growth Commission says that Scotland should retain the pound sterling for, and I quote, a possibly extended transition period. I don't know if that's weeks, months, years or decades.
Well, I think that is likely to be a period of years. But it is right that we have and that we set out, and the Growth Commission did this candidly. It set out the work that would require to be done. It set out the conditions and the tests that would require to be
I'm sorry to interrupt, but for years ahead, an independent Scotland would accept swallow monetary policy dictated by a Bank of England who would have absolutely no interest in what happened in the Scottish economy because it would be outside its remit. If there was another pandemic and they were slashing interest rates or another crisis and they were slashing interest rates, they would not be thinking about Scotland in any sense. So this allegedly independent Scotland would be dependent on the Bank of England for years for its monetary policy.
If the economic conditions allowed, we would move quicker to that. But Andrew, these are all decisions that people will weigh up in an independence referendum and take. What you've described right now
they're worth talking about, aren't they?
Of course they're worth talking about. You know, I'm often accused of wanting to talk about nothing but independence. It's not true, but I have absolutely the appetite to talk about these things. But it is right and proper that, as happened in 2014, the case for independence and all of the different issues that have to be confronted would be set out openly and clearly to people. But some of what is described, you'd have no control over this, that or the other. That's how life feels for people in Scotland right now. We've just been taken out of the European Union.
The Bank of England has to think about the Scottish economy right now.
Look,
after independence, it wouldn't. If there was another crunch,
and in a transition period, we would be doing the work to set up our own central bank and the infrastructure that goes with that. You're coming on to quantitative easing. There was more quantitative easing, I think, by the UK government than any other government in the financial crash, but actually the UK government did less well economically. What we want to do in Scotland is emulate some of the successes of small independent countries that avert these kind of banking crises in the future. But these are all, we've just been taken out of the European Union, we've just been taken out of the single market. You don't have to go far in Scotland right now to find companies that are paying a very heavy price for that, including fishing industry companies that were promised the earth and not delivered. So these are all big issues, these are all important issues, and these are issues that have to be laid out to people in Scotland fully and comprehensively so that an informed judgment can be made.
Because of the fiscal transfer, as it's called, Scotland's finances are effectively subsidised by English taxpayers at the moment. That would cease with independence. Is that a price worth paying?
Well, I don't accept that characterisation. Scotland pays its taxes in the same way as people in England pay their taxes. What you call the fiscal transfer, funded largely by borrowing by the UK government because the Scottish government doesn't have powers to borrow. But the other point is...
You say sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you say you won't accept it. Scotland receives £1,671 or 17% more per person than the UK average, and at the same time its tax revenues are £308 lower per person. So that means a fiscal transfer that would stop with independence. And I ask again, is that a price worth paying?
Look, if you're pointing to the position that Scotland has right now, the fiscal position of Scotland right now, that is a feature of Westminster government decisions around macroeconomic policy and fiscal decisions. It's not a reflection of independence. So are you, if anybody is saying...
It's a net move of money, isn't it?
Well, but why should a country like Scotland, with all of the attributes and assets and skills and natural and people resources that Scotland has, be in a position of requiring to use the pejorative language, subsidised? So if that's the position Scotland is in right now, that would suggest that there is something about how we are governed that is not working properly. It's not an argument for staying the same, it's an argument for change. Because when we look around Europe and the world right now, what we see is the world is littered with independent countries of a similar size to Scotland, some smaller than Scotland, that are amongst the most prosperous,
at least in this limited regard, you accept that Scotland will be a bit poorer. At least in that limited regard for that transfer, which is a factual transfer.
I don't accept that Scotland, as an independent country, will be poorer. I do accept that we will have to manage our finances like any other independent country, but the ability to manage that in a way that sits with our values, that
but in this limited regard, as it were, you accept the numbers.
We would, well, if you're quoting GERS, these are government figures. I'm not denying the validity of them. They're based on a range of assumptions that around the margins you could argue around, but we could take our own spending decisions. In there is the money that is spent on, things like the House of Lords, Trident, all things that I don't think an independent Scotland would choose to spend money on. So these are... Scotland is a wealthy, prosperous, skilled, talented country. Why on earth could we not be a prosperous, independent country?
The Prime Minister has invited you to a summit. Are you going to go?
Of course. I will work with the Prime Minister and anybody in the interests of COVID recovery. Of course I will. I've done it all through the last year. But I also want to be in a position where our decisions around the COVID recovery long term are not dependent on decisions that Boris Johnson takes, because I guess that at some point we will find that takes Scotland in a direction we don't want to go in. But I will cooperate with Boris Johnson and whoever in the interests of getting the country through COVID and into recovery.
We've heard that people in England, south of the border, are going to be able to hug again from the 17th of May and go into each other's houses. When is that going to happen in Scotland?
Look, I'm not going to give you that date right now, but I am leaving you to wind my way back to Butte House, and I'll be, over the course of today and tomorrow, meeting with clinical advisors. We have a COVID review on Tuesday, where we'll set out the final decisions for the next easing of restrictions scheduled for the 17th of May, and these are exactly the decisions that I'm anxious, as soon as you let me go, Andrew, to get back to and start to take.
One last question before I do. You've had a very, very long and up and down relationship with Alex Salmond. He's effectively, at the moment, it seems, more or less out of politics now. He was very pleased by some of the things that you said about him towards the end of the campaign. Is there any chance of a personal rapprochement?
Look, I don't think Alex Salmond and I are going to go back to the way things were, but you know, there is nothing about what has happened around Alex Salmond in the last few years that gives me any pleasure whatsoever. It is a source of quite deep sadness to me, and that's personal. Obviously, the politics are separate.
Well, let's move from one last non-personal question. Is Nicola Sturgeon going to be the First Minister who is still there to deliver independence?
I hope so. I've just won a landslide election and another term, 5-year term as First Minister. I've got the energy, the appetite to get on with the job. Firstly, to get us through COVID, that is my priority. And then I hope to lead Scotland to independence. But you know what? The future of Scotland, and I hope the independent future of Scotland, is much bigger than any one individual politician.
Nicola Sturgeon, thanks very much indeed for coming in to talk to us today. Much appreciated. That's all from me. Thanks to all my guests and, of course, to you for watching. I will be back next week at 9 o'clock, I hope. Until then, goodbye.